Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking with Chris Piche, who is the CEO and founder of Smarter AI. And we're going to be talking to Chris about something called AI-powered cameras, AI infrastructure, maybe fully autonomous vehicles, and the future of AI cameras and unmanned systems. But before we do that, I want to say hi to Chris. Chris, how are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Hey, it's my pleasure. And whereabouts are you located?
Greatest city in the world, Las Vegas, Nevada.
Really? Okay. That's interesting because I looked at your LinkedIn profile and I saw a couple other cities. And so I was like, okay, you did live in Singapore for a while, right?
Yeah, I lived in Singapore from 2015 until 2020.
Okay. I was there from 2008 to 2012. Been there, going there off and on for many years for business. But what's the biggest contrast for you, Singapore and the greatest city in the world, Las Vegas?
I'll say breakfast.
Okay.
Great breakfast in Las Vegas.
Yeah. Do you get those free local breakfasts? I mean, the locals get a lot of good deals, right?
I don't know about free, but maybe $1 or $2.
Well, that's pretty much free these days. I looked at your LinkedIn profile and you've worked for a variety of different ventures, different companies, and several of them are in the AI space. Why don't you just give me a bit of background about how you got into the space and exactly what does Smarter AI do?
Sure. So about 10 years ago, I was running a small company in Canada where I'm from. It was called Eyeball Networks. And we were the world leaders in something called NAT traversal. So in other words, the world leaders in something
that nobody heard of. I could just make up something. I could be the world leader in it because I guess so.
we were the world leaders in something most people have never heard of. But fortunately for us, it turned out that NAT traversal was a really important technology for smartphones. Mm-hmm. And so about 10 years ago, our NAT traversal product was acquired by another great Canadian company called BlackBerry.
Oh, yeah.
And we became a very small part of the BlackBerry smartphone.
Awesome. Can you just back up and explain what that technology, the NAT traversal, is or does?
Sure. So basically, in any kind of voice over IP or video telephony call like what you and I are doing now, in most cases, the system has to traverse a couple of NATs. So NAT stands for Network Address Translation. It's a component of most routers or most firewalls. Well, a couple reasons for NATs. One reason is shortage of IP addresses. Mm-hmm. So when the internet was first designed, the founding fathers of the internet probably did not anticipate.
It's never going to catch on. There will just be a few of these addresses.
Yeah, I don't think they anticipated such wide-scale use of the internet, and so IPv4 just doesn't have enough capacity for all of the internet-connected computers and mobile devices these days. So that was one of the original reasons for network address translation, was essentially to multiplex many internet-connected devices onto a single public IP address. But then, of course, we're here to talk about security today. An added benefit of network address translation is that it hides the the private IP address of my computer or my mobile device from whomever I'm communicating with on the internet. And so for those two reasons, network address translation is built into all sorts of routers and firewalls in the backbone of the internet, including the part of the backbone that connects mobile devices to the internet. And so for that reason, when BlackBerry decided to launch a smartphone in response to the iPhone, and what they thought was one of the killer features of the iPhone was, of course, FaceTime. BlackBerry at the time had something called BlackBerry Messenger, which was extremely popular for text messaging. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to enhance BlackBerry Messenger with voice and video calling to be competitive with FaceTime and to be a killer feature or a killer app for the BlackBerry smartphone. But in order for that BlackBerry video feature to work, it needed to support NAT traversal. It had to have a way to get the voice and video packets across these NATs that are everywhere in the internet.
NAT traversal.
Eyeball Networks, being the world leader in NAT traversal, our product was acquired by BlackBerry, incorporated into, I think at the time they were just calling it BlackBerry OS. That was basically the BlackBerry version of Android or the BlackBerry version of iOS. So it was incorporated into the BlackBerry OS, as well as some of the communications infrastructure that BlackBerry was operating at the time to authenticate and provide services to BlackBerry phones. And
That's
so,
awesome.
anyway, long introduction, but
Let me just stop you there. No, because I think everything's all connected here because you were in Singapore. I was in Singapore. I actually had a BlackBerry phone. I was working for a Swiss company. We had a lot of customers in the banking sector. So big requirement for security. So they're like, no, you can't have your iPhone. You've got to use a BlackBerry device. And I remember, I'm still like, my self-esteem is still not fully recovered, but I was hanging out with a bunch of friends down at Clark Key having beers. And everybody had their super slick iPhones. And I brought out this big silver BlackBerry. And people were like, what is that? They're like, is that a Soviet era kind of Soviet device or something? But it was all, hey, it's secure, man.
But did it have the keyboard? Did it have the keyboard?
It did. Yes. Oh, totally, man.
All right.
But anyway, please continue. So that led into.
Well, so I spent about a year helping BlackBerry to integrate our NAT traversal into the operating system and into BlackBerry Messenger and getting the smartphone product launched. And so I had a front row seat to how quickly a market could be disrupted by a technology transformation. So at the beginning of this 1 year that I spent with BlackBerry, their stock price was, if I recall, something more than $100. The market cap was, I think, $20 or $30 billion, which at the time was one of the biggest companies in the world, and I think by far the biggest company in Canada. And by the end of 1 year with BlackBerry, the stock price was down to, I think, $6.
Oh my goodness. And I think I remember that year. Yep.
Yeah, everybody watching and listening can do the math. It's about a 95% reduction in 1 year. It was all basically because in terms of the key metric for BlackBerry and for anybody in that business is what they call daily activations. And the way that works is, I think at the time BlackBerry had 50 or 60 million active subscribers. And a typical mobile phone or smartphone has a life cycle of 2 to 3 years. So just to use some round numbers and make the math simple, let's assume that BlackBerry is going to lose 100,000 subscribers every day, right? Just because my phone is too old, my buddies are making fun of me when we're drinking beer. I need to upgrade to something. I need to upgrade. I don't know if you have kids, had kids then or have kids now, but for me, that's my kids getting their hands on one of my phones and wreaking havoc is probably the most common reason why I upgrade one of my phones these days. But anyway, so if we're churning 100,000 customers in a day, then in order to just maintain our customer base, we have to be activating 100,000 new customers. And of course, we want to grow, so we want to do something in excess of 100,000 new customers. And what had happened was during that 1 year that I was with BlackBerry, these daily activations just fell off a cliff. And because people, I guess your buddies were ahead of the curve. They were churning their BlackBerries. And
another interesting thing, though, is I think I remember when all this happened, but one of the markets that was stubbornly bullish on BlackBerry was Indonesia. And I can't remember the reason why.
Yes.
But the Indonesian market for held out for several years.
Yeah, I think Apple, and rightfully so, was lauded for a lot of the engineering or product innovations in the iPhone. But something that they did, I think, equally well, if not maybe even better than the engineering or product innovations, was the business model innovations. And you may recall at the time that the iPhone was introduced, it was quite literally laughed at by executives from Microsoft, Nokia, BlackBerry. They basically scoffed at it and said, "This is a nice device. Number one, it's going to cripple the mobile networks. It pulls way too much data. The networks aren't going to be able to support it. And number two, who the hell's going to spend $800 or $900 on a phone? Nobody's going to spend $800 or $900 on a phone." So something that Apple did really well is they basically went around to the second and third place mobile operators in countries all over the world. And they said, "Look, we have a chance for you to leapfrog your competition. And all you have to do is hand over your entire marketing budget for the next 3 years. Okay? Give us your marketing budget for the next 3 years. We have this advertising campaign for iPhones, and we'll basically take your marketing budget and put it behind our iPhone marketing. And in exchange, we're going to give your number 2 or number 3 mobile carrier, we're going to give you the exclusive right to sell iPhones for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And since most people churn their phones in less than 3 years, we're going to create so much demand for these iPhones that people aren't going to care whether you're AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile. They're just going to want the iPhone.
That iPhone, yep.
And so they're going to switch, and you're going to leapfrog your competitor. And at the end of 3 years, you're going to be, number one in your market. Obviously, it was extremely successful. But getting back to your point about Indonesia, yeah, I was aware of that both at my time with BlackBerry and also during the 5 years or so that I lived in Singapore. For some reason, be like the last market that was using BlackBerry phones in any meaningful way. And I think the last market that was using BlackBerry Messenger was Indonesia. I don't know the reason why, but I think it must have something to do with business relationships that BlackBerry was able to establish and maintain with the local carriers.
I remember something along the lines of just the coverage that the devices had in Indonesia was superior to what Apple, the iPhones, could get at the time. And maybe it was because they had the relationship with the predominant carrier. I don't recall, but, it was very interesting. And so when I went to Indonesia, nobody laughed at me. So anyway, so that led to...
so I saw how quickly, literally in 1 year, BlackBerry lost about 95% of its market cap. And if you looked at their income statement or their balance sheet, it hadn't changed very much. The main thing that had changed was these daily activations. And essentially the writing was on the wall that there were another 2 to 3 years left in the BlackBerry phone business. And after that, it was going to go to zero. And so fast forward a few years when I was done with my time at BlackBerry. And then in between, I'd spent a few years in Singapore helping a friend of mine who had founded a fintech company. And then eventually I decided that I wanted one more kick at the can myself, so to speak. So I had to think of a business opportunity that was sort of in my wheelhouse in terms of my skill set. So I needed something to do with computer networking and network multimedia technologies. Thinking back to my time at BlackBerry, I wanted something where there was on the horizon, I could see a technology transformation that would potentially lead to a market disruption. So in other words, I wanted to do something with the skills or the knowledge that I have when it comes to computer networks and multimedia. And I wanted to do something where there was an opportunity to transform the technology and disrupt a market. And after a few months of deep thinking, I came to the conclusion that the same thing that had happened now 10 years ago in the phone business was about to happen in the camera business. So if you think about it, 10 years ago when you're sitting in Clark Key with your friends, with your BlackBerry, maybe some other friends of yours had the Nokia, the Motorola flip phone, Ericsson phones, all these feature phones. These phones could essentially do two things. They could make a call or send a text message. That's it. And back then I don't know about you, but I probably used my BlackBerry or my Nokia phone maybe 5 minutes a day. A couple text messages, a couple phone calls. That was it. Today, I think I've got 4 of these smartphones now. And I think I probably use them instead of 5 minutes a day, I probably use them 5 hours a day. And the reason for that is they're so much more useful. They can do so many, instead of doing 2 things, they can do 200 things or 2,000 things. So I saw an opportunity, or I foresaw that the same thing would happen in cameras. So if you think about it, legacy cameras, just like feature phones, they do 2 things. They either display the video as it's happening on a screen, or they record it on a disk, right? And because they can only do these 2 things with the video, even though there's lots of valuable data, lots of valuable insights in there, most of it doesn't get acted on because the video just doesn't get watched and it gets stored and then eventually it gets purged. And I thought that thanks to a couple of enabling technologies, namely neural networks and neural network accelerators, it would soon be feasible to make AI cameras at a low enough cost and with enough horsepower to really be useful. And I thought that in the same way that smartphones transformed and then disrupted the phone market, I thought that these AI cameras would do the same thing to the camera market. So instead of having video that is displayed on a screen or stored on a disk, but it never really gets analyzed and the insights don't get acted on. If AI cameras could see and listen and understand what's happening around them, and then they could let us know when something important or something interesting is happening, I thought that would be similar to the transformation and lead to a disruption similar to what happened in the phone business.
So can you maybe walk me through a use case? I'm assuming that you would train the AI camera to, for example, if you're driving a car and something runs in front of the car, it does a signal or something like this. This is probably a basic thing. Or if it's, I don't know, walk me through a use case of an AI camera. Yeah.
Well, so there's many use cases, but some of the common ones that most people are going to be familiar with is counting people, recognizing people, counting cars, recognizing cars, and recognizing roads and different traffic infrastructure like stop signs and lanes on the road and that sort of thing. And these are all the building blocks of one of the topics that we'll get into in a little bit here, which is autonomous driving. So autonomous driving is based entirely on the idea or on the premise that the car can see and understand its surroundings and recognize these kinds of objects, which can then be used for navigating the vehicle.
How far are we out from fully autonomous vehicles? You can say, given context, because I understand that they're more effective in certain scenarios than they are in others. The truck example is, hey, they're pretty good on the open highway, but you need somebody for that last mile to drive in heavy traffic. But in terms of just like normal passenger cars, how far out are we?
That's a really interesting question. So I think in terms of the technology, I think we're either there or we're very close to being there to having technology that works well enough. Then the question becomes, how quickly will that technology be deployed and be adopted? But there's a couple of interesting questions about that. And one of the interesting questions is actually it's a societal or social question. And Tesla made a very interesting comment. I think it was last week. And their comment was, they were asked the same question: how much more quickly are you going to roll out your self-driving technology? And the preface to their answer was, when the technology is 10 times safer than a human driver. And that's really interesting because Elon Musk has very famously, for the last, I don't know how many years, 6 or 8 years, he's been saying this is the year, or next year is the year that we're going to deploy the full self-driving. And I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, he said this is the year a Tesla is going to drive from Los Angeles to New York or New York to Los Angeles, completely based on autonomous driving. And of course, that hasn't happened yet. And the thing that he understood was the technology, but I think the thing that he failed to take into account was the double standard that we have for accidents or collisions that are caused by human drivers versus accidents or collisions that are caused by autonomous drivers. And so even here in the greatest city in the world, in Las Vegas, there's car accidents that happen all day, every day. It's not newsworthy.
But if a Tesla has an issue,
one Tesla is involved in an accident, it's front page news. And not only is it front page news, there's an immediate assumption that the accident was caused by the Tesla FSD system, right?
or the batteries blew up. Hey.
Right, exactly, or the battery caught on fire. So the thing that Elon didn't understand is he didn't understand the threshold or the standard that needed to be achieved in order for the autonomous driving to be widely accepted. And that's a pretty high bar.
And I think I like the 10-to-1 kind of rule there, but I don't even think that's going to be enough, seriously, because you get into these ethical situations where if I'm driving down the road and a lady pushing her baby buggy jumps in front of me and I have a choice to swerve around her and hit a school bus,
Sure.
and how does a machine process that and what decision does it make? And whatever decision it makes, it's going to be wrong.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be, the driver may be somewhat liable, but ultimately the money's it's going to come back upstream to the software or the camera or the car company. And I'm just wondering, are they willing to take that liability on? So the 10-to-1 thing, I would say that the profitability of the sales of these autonomous vehicles would have to be significantly higher than the potential downside of these ethical dilemmas, in addition to just the regular normal crashes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So in the United States, drunk driving causes about 10,000 fatalities every year. And complacent and distracted driving cause another 10,000 fatalities every year, right? So people texting and driving or eating and drinking while they're driving. And you're absolutely right. We sort of take that for granted. But if there's one fatality involving a situation like what you just described, for some reason that is less acceptable to us as a society than the 10 or 20,000 fatalities that are caused by drunk, complacent, and distracted driving.
Yeah, and both of those are terrible numbers and terrible behaviors. I'm a cyclist, mostly mountain bike, but I do get on the road, and I can't believe how many cars that either go by me or I go by them, and people just staring at their phones. It scares me. It's like, wow.
Yeah, I don't know which part of the country you live in, but you're very brave to get on the roads on a bicycle.
Yeah, maybe you could say stupid. Stupid's okay.
Even in Las Vegas, once or twice a year, there are fatalities involving cars or trucks and cyclists. I think there was one last year. I think a truck
in Phoenix
mowed down an entire platoon. There was like some sort of a cycling club.
That was in Phoenix. Yeah.
That in Phoenix, I think it was between Phoenix and Las Vegas.
Okay. Yeah, it's pretty scary. So the other issue that I think, which may be an issue or may not be an issue, but it's perceived as an issue. And if it's perceived societally as an issue, then it's an issue. And that would be the security of these cameras. And so let's just talk about the cameras, whether it's cameras that Smarter AI is involved with or just out in the market. And these, because cameras are also integrated with other components on autonomous vehicles, the security of these devices, because if they can be hacked, the vehicle can be guided certain direction. It could be malfunction. What steps are being taken to ensure the security of these cameras and other devices?
Right. So first of all, a lot of steps are being taken. There's regulations both generally with respect to personal data, and then there are regulations specifically around vehicles and vehicle cameras as far as cybersecurity, securing the cameras, securing the data, whether it's at rest or in transit. And then the other thing, Mark, is that all of these autonomous transportation systems, they're all based on neural network models. And the neural network models really only work as well as the data on which they're trained. And so not only do we have to think about securing the cameras and securing the data from hackers, we also have to think about how do we secure the data internally. I think it was a couple of months ago, there was a breach reported from Tesla where some people inside the company were using videos recorded from some Tesla vehicle cameras. And I guess the videos were intended to be used for training or improving the Tesla autonomous driving system, but for whatever reason, some employees were allegedly using the videos for some other purposes. So we have to think about hackers outside of the company. Well, we also have to think about sort of tools and processes inside our companies.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. And so I'm what I'm hearing you say that it's a priority. There are some standards or regulations that govern the deployment of these devices. When you talk about the training, do you create your own training data for these cameras? Or does your customers say, hey, we want you to use this training data? How does that work?
So going back to when I founded Smarter AI, Smarter AI is a software platform for AI cameras. So you can think of it as smarter AI is to cameras as Android or iOS are to phones.
Gotcha.
And I got this idea actually goes back to my time at BlackBerry again. So really interesting, a couple interesting things about my time developing the BlackBerry smartphone. So one thing was all of our phones, whether you were talking about Apple or whether you were talking about BlackBerry or some of the other failed smartphones from companies like Nokia, all of these phones were based on the same chips, and they were all manufactured by the same Taiwanese companies in the same production lines in China, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you compare the products, what was the difference between all of these products? Well, the main difference between all of these products was just the software platform. And it was the software platform that enabled Apple first and then later Google or Android. It was the software platform that enabled them to find the product market fit. In other words, to create the user experience that would generate demand. And so when I started Smarter AI, again, I decided that the product market fit and therefore the value would lie in the software. So we focused on making a software platform for AI cameras. We work with third parties who actually manufacture the cameras. And then much like your iPhone or your Android device, our cameras enable each customer to pick and choose the AI models that they want to deploy on their cameras. So I'll give you a really simple example. 2 different customers with the same cameras based on the Smarter AI platform. And one customer can download a model for counting people. A second customer can use the exact same camera, but he can download a model for counting cars. Or an example it's getting a bit dated now, but I used it a couple years ago. Imagine you're a bank manager and you've got these fantastic Smarter AI cameras. And you want to use these cameras to help your security people. So you say, okay, great. We're going to download an AI model and put it on our camera. And we want this AI model to find anybody who walks into our bank wearing a mask. Because if somebody comes into the bank wearing a mask, we know they're about to rob the place, and we want to call the police right away.
Unless there's a pandemic.
Right. And then, of course, like 2-3 months later, you're the bank manager. Now you want to essentially reprogram your cameras. You want to find
anybody without a mask.
Exactly.
They're a spreader.
And so that's essentially what you can do with the Smarter AI camera, which differentiates us from our competitors. In the same way that each end user of an Android phone or an iPhone can pick and choose the apps that they want to use, our customers can pick and choose the models that they want to use.
How many companies are in your space?
In AI cameras?
Well, no, in the specific space that Smarter AI is in.
Not too many that are focusing on the software platform. There are some competitive products at Microsoft, Azure, and AWS. Mm-hmm. But those products are a little bit different. Those products are tightly coupled to the cloud infrastructure that those companies offer. So basically, if you want to make AI cameras that can only work with Microsoft Azure, mm-hmm. or make AI cameras that can only work with us, those 2 companies have software platforms that'll let you do that. We're, I think, the only company that's sort of, let's say, cloud agnostic platform for AI cameras.
Yeah, I can see the value in that. I'm just curious, doesn't matter what tech space you're in, well, up until recently, I should say, one of the biggest challenges is finding qualified developers anywhere in the world. But you're in a relatively new space. How did you deal with that challenge?
So you're absolutely right. That's one of our primary challenges. And I guess I'm happy to report that is still as much of a challenge as it's ever been. I think if you're talking about highly skilled computer scientists, highly skilled system software developers, people who are highly skilled in machine learning, regardless of what's happening in the general economy or the general market, the demand for people with those skills is going nowhere but up. So that's absolutely a huge challenge for us.
Let me ask you, in terms of your business model, do you sell your platform directly to the camera manufacturers, you partner with them, or do you go to, you go to the military and say, hey, we could design these cameras that could be battlefield ready to identify adverse events and make a recommendation, or at least report them so that, that they're aware of it. Because if you're out there, you're busy, the camera spots something that you've trained it to be alert for. Do you deal with the end customer, or are you talking with the manufacturers?
Well, the answer is both. So we work with several manufacturers to make sure that we have cameras available in popular or common form factors. So in the same way, I guess it's similar to Android, where the people at Android would want to make sure that they have some inexpensive smartphones, maybe some high-end smartphones, some tablets, whatever it is. They want to make sure that they have hardware that's going to meet the needs of most of the market. And so we work with camera manufacturers for the same reason. And then at the same time, when we work with channel partners and end customers, in most cases, we can meet the needs of the market with those sort of common off-the-shelf camera form factors. But there are also cases, and you mentioned one, the military being one of them, where there's a requirement for essentially some bespoke hardware or a bespoke form factor. And in cases like that, we'll work with our customers to develop something to meet their needs.
Excellent. Well, let me ask you this. What has been the coolest application for a AI camera that you've seen to date, and then make a prediction of what we're going to see or be able to do, say, 5 years from now?
I may be biased, but I'm going to say that the coolest application that I've seen is vehicle cameras that can detect unsafe drivers or unsafe driving. So in other words, vehicle cameras that can detect when a car is being driven in an unsafe way, or detect when a driver is behaving in an unsafe way. For example, texting and driving. And we've already started to see this kind of technology being mandated both in America, in Europe, China, Australia. Many parts of the world have started to mandate this technology for vehicles. And I think what we're going to see in 5 years is I think we're going to see a big reduction in distracted and complacent driving. And I think we're also going to see a shift in society in terms of how we perceive that behavior. What I mean by that is, I think for most of us today, we understand and we acknowledge that impaired driving is unsafe, it's selfish, reckless, any kind of bad adjective you want to apply to it. And I think most of us would never engage in impaired driving. And if we want to go out and have a couple of drinks after dinner, whether it's an Uber or a friend who's going to do the driving, we'll take steps to act responsibly. And yet today, the same people will drive through a school zone with their face buried in a text message or whatever it is, or Instagram or whatever it happens to be, running on their phone. And so I think the cool change that we're going to see is, I think in 5 years' time, that kind of complacent or distracted driving, I think we're going to perceive it in the same way that we perceive impaired driving today.
Well, I certainly hope so. We've made these big changes before. Drinking and driving is a great example of something that just is no longer acceptable at all. Yeah. Smoking in certain situations is no longer acceptable. I mean, people used to smoke on airplanes. It's kind of crazy. It's just like, you want to sit in the smoking section? I'm like, on an airplane? What could go wrong?
To smoke in offices.
Yeah.
Imagine that, just to go to work, you had to subject yourself to 8 or 10 hours of that, right?
Certainly hope your predictions are true. I was kind of hoping, though, because you're in Vegas, that I could get these super cool glasses.
Yeah.
And they would tell me when I should hold or hit, So I'm sure that's coming, man. I'm sure that's coming. They might already be out there.
I'm sure there's some people here in Vegas working on that. But since one of the things that we're talking about is cybersecurity, I'm equally sure that the guys that run the casinos in Vegas are working on some countermeasures.
I'm sure. Chris, if our listeners or viewers want to get more information about Smarter AI or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So our website is smarterai.camera.
Okay, I like it.
You can find me online. I think my Twitter is real Chris Piche. You can find me on LinkedIn, which I guess you did.
Yeah, and I can put a link to your website in the show notes as well.
Okay, great.
Enjoyed this conversation and would like to wish you a great summer.
Yeah, so did I, and thank you for having me, Mark.
Cheers, man.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.